This is another iRaw podcast.
Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals. Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals.
Knowing Animals is a podcast where we speak to animal studies scholars about a piece of their work. I'm Siobhan O'Sullivan and I do like knowing animals. Well, this episode of Knowing Animals is brought to you by ASA. ASA is the Australasian Animal Studies Association. Now, the very, very wise people of ASA have decided that they're going to change their membership or their substructure a little bit. So people who are employed will pay a little bit more. It's going to be $60 a year for people who are waged. And those who are insecure work or those who are in insecure work or unemployed will pay even less. I think for them it will be $15 a year. So it's very, very affordable. It's a real bargain, and people from all around the world can easily join and pay via PayPal. So if you're not already a member of ASA, you should think about joining. That's ASA, the Australasian Animal Studies Association. Okay, well, this is another very, very special episode of Knowing Animals. I'm really pleased to be back in my old stomping ground, which is the University of Melbourne in the lovely city of Melbourne. And it's a delight to be joined by someone who I've known for a long time, who I've worked with for a long time, who I've even published with. So this week I'm joined by Dr. Susan Pyke. Sue is a lecturer in the School of Culture and Communications at the University of Melbourne, and today we're going to discuss Sue's brand new book, which is called Animal Visions, Posthumanist Dream Writing, and it was published by Palgrave Macmillan as part of their Palgrave Studies in Animals and Literature series in 2019. Welcome to the podcast, Sue.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. It's a pleasure to be sitting talking to you.
Now, Sue, you know the first question. You're a return guest. Why this work? What inspired it?
Well, it began with my PhD, so it's not that recognisable if you put my PhD and the book together. But certainly the last 10 years of academic thinking that I've been doing has been around the question of posthumanist dream writing, which is a tricky kind of a concept, and that's why it's taken me a whole book to get the framework together. In fact, the introduction is a good third of the book, and then the rest of the book is giving that framework, activating that framework through examples of reading the texts that are interesting to me. So it's been a long project that I've had a lot of fun thinking about, but the fact that it's taken that long to write and think about means it's quite dense. So it's a slow read. My mother would like it to be a lot more readable, but the concept itself is not a difficult one to get your head around. And that's simply that there are ways that you can write creatively or even make films creatively that might well change the way people relate to other people of the non-human species. So in order to show that, because I'm an animal literary scholar, not a social scientist, the way that I decided to show that was look at a particular work which I have loved for a long time, which is Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, and then look at certain ways that other writers have playfully engaged with that text, picking up what Emily Bronte's doing with human, non-human relations in I would say, a very radical way, and doing that again in their own work. So sort of talking back from where they're situated. And there are some fantastic works that I love very much that I work with. So there's the astounding punk poet, Kathy Acker, who wrote a incredible poem called Obsession, and I'm always indebted to Marion May Campbell, but my supervisor put me on to this poem. I downloaded it when I was working in the public service, and it said, no, you do not download that kind of stuff here. So there is a little bit of language that may offend some people, but it's an excellent poem. And she writes directly back to that Kathy Heathcliff animal relationship. And That was in the 1990s. So, you've got 150 years later, you've got this avant-garde writer taking Wuthering Heights, doing something completely different with it. But still, if you like, flying the flag high for more equitable relations between humans and other species. Another one that I have spent a lot of time with, it's another poet, is Anne Carson's A Glass Essay, and that again directly talks to the novel through poetry. There's less in there about animals, but what Anne Carson does is show the way that Emily Bronte invites her listeners into an uncomfortable, new and innovative space through a kind of writing that I call dream writing. So when I say posthumanist dream writing, I'm talking about works that do not centralize a human. They are much more interested in the individual specificity of each person, be they human or not human, and they write in a way that is as disturbing and as exciting and as meaningful as our dreams. And I guess the thing that I find interesting in the project as a whole is that this is just my reading. It's not the right reading. It's a way of showing that whoever you are, however you like to read, whatever you like to read, you might read as a posthumanist dream reader.
Wonderful. So there are many layers to the book, and as you note, the introduction is very long. I thought I'd just quickly read the introduction, but it wasn't to be the case.
Uh-oh.
But Sue, you might be surprised to know that there are dummies out there like me who I don't really know what the story of Wuthering Heights is. I once had a nice cat called Heathcliff, but that's about as connected as I am to the book. Could you tell the listeners, could you share with listeners such as myself who don't know the story, certainly not in detail, what it's about and why animals, or where you think animals play a key role in the text?
Sure. So I find that there's almost two camps of reading Wuthering Heights. And one is it's the grandest love story there is between two humans, Cathy and Heathcliff, who face adversity in their love relationship, and it all ends very badly. There's another more radical reading of the novel, which is that while this love story is important, it's a love story that is as much about the moors or about place as it is about Heathcliff and Cathy. And often when you talk to people who love the novel, it's that they talk to. There's all sorts of controversies for many people. They read the novel as a critique of abuse because of the violence of Heathcliff. Other people would read it as abuse in terms of the way that Heathcliff is poorly used because of his colour and because of his class status. So it's a very complicated book, and it's one of those books that people read in very different ways. It is that kind of 19th century novel where it's very intricately written. It was when it was published, it was very controversial. People assumed it had been written by quite a wild man, and then they found out it was by a parson's daughter and kind of couldn't quite put both together. So it's been a little bit controversial ever since it was written, but people still read it right across the world. It's one of those novels that if you do read it, if you're one of those people that do read it, you'll either think, I can't get past the first chapter, or it will stay with you for the rest of your life. And obviously I'm the second kind of person. So
when you first read it, or perhaps even when you first started working with it as a text, how did the non-human come into it?
Not at first. So when I first started reading it as a critical text for my PhD, I came at it from a feminist perspective. I still do. And I was very interested in the way that the depiction of dreams and ghosts and love were done in ways that were not the kind of dreams, ghosts and love that keep women in their place. It's a kind of wildness of the novel that I was interested in, that kind of excessive nature of it. So it started with the feminist reading. And what got animals into the conversation for me was I started thinking about the way that Heathcliff was often called all sorts of ways you might describe a dog. Gnashing of teeth, the mongrel, cur. And I thought that's really interesting because I was already reading Heathcliff as sympathetically. So I started wondering, what is it about the relationship between the dog and Heathcliff that has to be so negative? So I started to try and work out how you can think about the metaphorical aspects of the novel. And that's when I started to enter into literary animal scholarship. That was quite a while ago. That was probably maybe 2008, 2007. It's a very different field now. But there was enough to get me started. And I don't know if you remember when you bought Robert McKay and Annette Pick, and I think it was Tom Tyler into the university, and that was for me a really galvanising moment because I saw that there were people really interested in the questions that I was really interested in, and that's when the book really started, I would say, at that point where I started seeing that there was something quite new and creative I could do with my approach to Wuthering Heights. And then I think I've talked about it before when I've talked to you in this forum. I went to an animal studies conference. I met you. I started coming to your reading group and joined AASA, which, as you say, is the most excellent way to engage with scholars in the field. It's incredibly supportive community, and I second you in saying it's well worth joining, particularly for the $15 a year now. It's a really good idea to do. For me anyway, it was so fundamental to me feeling empowered, and also the audience made me think, yeah, I think maybe I have got something to say here.
Well, it must feel wonderful to know that Bob is one of the editors of the series that you're published in. So, what a triumph for the book to really start with Bob coming to speak at the University of Melbourne, and now he's the editor of this, series that you've got this magnificent book in. So I want to pick up a little bit on the importance of being in dialogue with other animal studies scholars, because you were still probably are a very loyal attendee at the monthly reading group that is hosted at the University of Melbourne. What is it about that dialogue? How does that help you stimulate ideas or help you as a creative thinker?
I think what that community does for me is remind me that the work is really important. Not everyone in my life, not everyone I'm close to has the same political affiliation that I do to animal rights, animal liberation, whatever you might like to call that decision to try to live your life differently in relationship to other animals. So that community made me kind of sustained me in my work it's very simple. You sit down with people that we haven't started yet and you start talking about what you're doing and people go, and you can see in those conversations that you're not just talking to yourself, but the other thing that happens at the same time is that you've got people sitting around you who are working in very different areas, and all of these things are doing their thing. So I don't expect this book, of course, to change everything, but it makes me feel that the work is happening on all sorts of fronts, and I'm on one particular front that joins the powerful and passionate thinking of other people. And so that camaraderie for me has been really important, and things kind of emerge out of those conversations. So, for example, the latest thing that we are thinking about is what does it mean to write animals, paint animals, make movies of animals in an ethical way? How do we even start talking to our students about that? What sort of resources do we need as teachers to have that conversation? And because of the people that are around that room, and because of the people we know we can reach out to, like yourself and like Yvette Watts, who are not in Melbourne, we can kind of think, well, we don't just have to talk about this. Let's get some kind of manifesto up and running that we can put out there to help people like us. So it's been a terrific way for me to change the way that I live my life and the way that I write. And as I actually mentioned in a page of this book, it was your love cake that got me vegan.
Yeah, isn't that funny? As a perhaps indicative of being an egomaniac, I did, when faced with a very, very dense book, think, oh, I'll put my name in and see if I'm referenced anywhere, and then that'll be a section I'll be able to penetrate. And I'm not cited for my many publications, but my Persian love cake did make it into the book. So that's a great privilege. Thank you. I've not made it in a while, but obviously it's a winning recipe. I should whip it out again. So, Sue, I guess that brings us to the big question. You say that, you know, all this kind of highly speciest way of being in this world and writing and creating art and reading things and thinking has generated injustices against animals. So what is a big takeaway from your book? What do we know now better about animals, or better about the human, non-human animal relationship because of all this hard work you've done?
I think if nothing else, I've proven to myself why books like Black Beauty matter. I've proven to myself why the books that I try to write might matter. And what I've learned and what I'm trying to put forward in the book is it's not a one-way street. It's not just that Anne Sewell was doing amazing work at that time and I could read it as a young reader a century plus later. It was that because I was familiar with and close to horses, I could read Black Beauty and think, oh, imagine if Queenie was treated this way. So it's what I'm trying to show in Animal Visions is that readers are so important, and when we write and when we read, we're actually in a very, as when we dream, we're in a vulnerable state where we're much more likely to be deeply influenced than when we're sitting, let's say even if we're going down the street and we're joining a march, or we're going to a lecture, or we're reading horrifying statistics or watching a documentary. That is important, and we bring that to our reading. But my view is that creative works, particularly very innovative or kind of books, poems that ask something of the reader, that leave enough space for the reader to think, I'm puzzled and I'm not quite sure how my reading can kind of accommodate this puzzling moment. That question, that moment of pause is where radicalization can actually occur. So that's what, I guess, in terms of what I'm trying to encourage in writers, is to allow space for the reader, be innovative, have faith in their ability to bring themselves into the text, because if it doesn't have those openings, then it will be as closed as if you go to, or as safe as if you go to a lecture. Whereas if you are both vulnerable together, the writer and the reader, then you can perhaps change the way that those readers are thinking about animals because of the way that you're changing as you're writing about animals. So I think that's kind of what I would love people to realise, that in this very fraught and very at-risk world, a lot has to be done, and some of that work is reading and writing creatively and innovatively, because things need to change.
And is this a call to readers as well? Are you hoping that readers will learn or adapt to bring a critical lens to the way they read and think about animal issues?
I hope so. I really do. What I've argued in the book is that that's a very individual thing, and I think that these things work in tandem. It's one of those truths I think that we accept in this area now, that nothing happens without other things happening. So, for example, my interest is very strongly in working through settler Indigenous relations at the moment. And so when I read now, I'm really thinking through that particular perspective, like what's happening here. So I read, for example, Kim Scott's Taboo, and there's the ending is brilliant, where you have this fantastic crossing between what we might call human and non-human, but from the perspective he's writing from, those divisions are so irrelevant. It's just kin and ancestry coming together in a moment. But because he writes it in this dreamlike way, I would say it's a dream-written text in many ways. I read that differently because of where I am now than I would have read it had he published 10 years ago. So I guess the people that would read this book will already be interested in the agency and the politics that come with reading, if you like, even the responsibility of reading. So I'm kind of, if you like, working with those readers going, yeah, this is really important. Don't think that books are irrelevant. Don't think that it's not important to read or write. This is something. This is part of a broader struggle that will help us hopefully repair a lot of the injuries that are present in the way that humans are treating other species.
Wonderful. Well, Sue, I ask everyone who comes on the podcast to answer quick questions. Because you're a return guest, you've got 4 quick questions. Are you ready for your 4 quick questions? What's been the most satisfying or rewarding aspect of conducting animal studies research?
Well, I guess I touched on that before when I was talking about the way my living has changed. And so you might think that I'm not perhaps understanding your scholarly position by eating that cake, but by you offering that cake as part of your philosophical practice, that's a changing moment. It was changing for me. It doesn't, but it wasn't that you rocked in and it was an epiphany. There was lots of stuff that had happened before that, right? So it's about, for me, it's a lot about firstly finding people that are thinking in ways that are complementary or challenging to the way that I think, and also changing the way that I live my life. That's been incredible over the last 10 years, and it's taken me in a direction that I always wanted to take.
Wonderful. Well, what's been the most challenging or disheartening aspect of being an animal studies scholar?
Well, I guess challenging is keeping across the scholarship, and as you would know, the amount of brilliant work that's just increasing exponentially, it's no longer possible for me, I don't think. And that's, I guess, what's happening, I think, in my own scholarly practice is perhaps I'm reading less widely, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So, for example, I don't know if you remember, we had some great discussions about abattoirs years and years ago. And so I'm reading a brilliant poet at the moment that's got a fantastic prose poem about abattoirs. That's Alison Whittaker. And that kind of broad reading that I did with back in those years allows me to really think carefully about what she's doing with that work. So that's challenging, but I can't see my way through it. Disheartening, well, things have to change really quickly, and they're not changing that quickly.
Well, Sue, this is your chance to give a shout out to an animal studies scholar that you would like to make listeners aware of. It could be an emerging scholar, it could be someone from the global south, it could be someone who hasn't got the attention you think they deserve, or someone perhaps who's publishing in English in a language other than English. Who's your shout out?
I know this is going to sound really parochial, but I think look out for Hayley Singer, because when her work comes out, it is what I would call a posthumanist dream written text. It's scholarly, but it's so full of heart and so beautifully written that I think it will make a very serious and beautiful intervention in the way that people think about the way the flesh culture, that the Fleischgeist operates. So yeah, look out for Hayley Singer.
Wonderful. Yes, lovely Hayley. So Hayley's been a guest on the show before, and I ran into her last week and I said, Hayley, let me know when you're ready to come back on. And she's promised that she will. So we all stand by waiting for her book, and she absolutely deserves success and accolades. Well, Sue, are you optimistic about the future of human, non-human animal relations?
I don't know if this is optimistic or dark, but I think that there can be no future if animal non-human relations change fundamentally. So we just have to look at in the industry of animal agriculture. There is no future if people continue to slaughter and consume animals the way they are now. So fairly simply, unless things change in the way that we relate to other species, the same goes. My book actually travels quite a long way before it gets to animals itself, because I go from dreams and visioning to what the more might be and habitat, and then I talk about animals. So it's partly consumption, but it's also our future is about what we're doing with the land that we walk upon and the respect that we need to pay that land. And I guess, to me, more generally in terms of what is exciting me about scholarship is the emerging Indigenous scholars. I am most familiar with those in Australia that are doing such good work to trouble the relations that we take for granted.
Wonderful. Well, Sue, what are you working on next?
I'm working on a snake book.
Wow.
So it's fun. It's getting to a point where I'm comfortable to call it a book. That's taken probably 2 or 3 years.
Right.
And it's a little bit memoir, and it's a little bit scholarly thinking. It's a little bit poetic, and it's lots of fun to write. And it's based in the area where I was brought up in, which is in the Stony Rises, which is commonly known as Snake Country. So it's a book that is about tiger snakes particularly, and most specifically about a snake that I take the liberty of calling Selena, who I've started to get to know over the process of this new project. Wow.
Well, I look forward to the book and also having you on the program again. So, Sue, how can people find out more about your work?
If they go to academic.edu.au and look for Susan Pyke, they'll find most of the work that I've published is there.
Wonderful. Well, Sue, thank you so much for coming on Knowing Animals.
My absolute pleasure. I love talking with you, Siobhan.
Thank you, Sue. And thank you to the listeners for joining us for Knowing Animals, the podcast where we speak to animal studies scholars about their work. Now, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at knowing_animals, or you can follow me at SO_S. You can also like us at Facebook and also on Instagram. And finally, don't forget to leave a review on iTunes. Reviews make it easier for other people to find us. I'm Siobhan O'Sullivan, and I do like knowing animals. For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's IROARPOD.com.